when you're forced to put it all in a linear timeline on your LinkedIn page, that I think reduces the dimensionality of our identity. There's a lot of potential when you start thinking about decoupling who you know from the content that you see and create. So our thesis is the only way that you can make the data actually interoperable is by giving people a means and a motive to do it themselves. I think the key unlock is having a user-owned identity protocol or layer. And then the other unlock is having the AI agent infrastructure to be able to easily use that.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, so we have by now had various conversations at the intersection of personal agency, digital identity, personal data stores, intent casting, or my data business models. We have also addressed the legal issues associated with using blockchain or Web3 technologies a few months ago with Joanna Mota. Today we're following a recent interview with Jamie Smith on AI agents and also digital identity. We will do this with Dan Stone, who is co-founder and CEO at Icebreaker, a decentralized professional networking platform that takes no effort to join. In fact, you can already find Master of Privacy and myself in it, and that could act as a key identity piece or building block in a more human-centric world. Dan has spent his career building products at the intersection of predictive analytics, AI, and privacy. He served as group product manager at Google, where he built cross-identity measurement products within the Google Analytics offering, and even making the tool GDPR compliant was part of his job. And he was also group product manager at Coinbase, where he led consumer trading and earned a patent for AI-assisted multi-chain intent orchestration, whatever that means. He holds a BS in Management Science from MIT. Let's go for it. Dan, thanks for joining me.
Nice to be here, Sergio.
Good to see you again. Okay, to start, identity, right? Identity and the blockchain. What is this idea, this notion of trustless and anti-fragile? What does that mean?
Great question. Identity is such a big topic. It's one of the reasons why it's so hard to do well, because it can mean so many different things, and it can mean different things in different contexts too. You know, who we are. We on the internet, we can range from completely anonymous to partially pseudonymous to this is my public profile, or these are all of my public profiles, and this is the history of where I've lived, right? And then there's also other things that are knowable about us too, based on some of our identifiers. Like another founder recently showed me how, given my phone number, he can instantly look up my social security number and my address history using these data brokers that are basically just like reselling credit data in the United States. And that's super creepy. And they don't even talk about that because of how creepy it is. And yet, this data is available. So identity is very, very large. But one of the frustrating things about identity is that most of the time when we're on the internet, we don't own the identities that we use. And that is a fundamental problem on the internet. Like, we solved this with emails and with websites, but in research, they have found that websites are really the only thing that people fundamentally feel like they own on the internet. And meanwhile, we go to these conferences and we're sharing our X or our LinkedIn handles, and we're thinking we're making connections. And yet, really, those platforms are owning our connections, and they also own our identities. And so that is a fundamental problem that I think we need to solve on the internet.
Why is it still the best way to address identity using or relying on the blockchain?
Well, I think the blockchain offers several superpowers when it comes to data that we haven't had before. And this isn't to say that all data should go on the blockchain. I know you touched on it in your interview with Adrian Dirk a while back, and that was kind of in the context of, do we need to put government certificates on the blockchain? And I don't think we necessarily need to do that. But there are other types of data that are valuable, and in some contexts, way more valuable than, am I a US citizen or not? It's like, do people that you trust say that I'm good to work with or that I know what I'm talking about, right? And those are attestations that right now live on LinkedIn in their centralized database. And if I were to quote Chris Dixon's Read Write Web, he said, if a company controls the attestation database, it can leverage this control in order to restrict or charge for access. And that's exactly what we see happening, right? So going back to, how does this then get solved with blockchain? Well, the blockchain lets us put data or pointers to data in a place where anybody else can see, or anybody that I choose to see can see it, and I can prove that it happened. And it allows us the cryptographic verifiability and the composability and the immutability. So it's those three benefits that blockchain allows us to achieve, which is what gives something like Icebreaker the credibility to be able to say, no, this isn't just another LinkedIn, and we're going to turn into LinkedIn as soon as we reach enough scale and make you start paying for access to your network. We can actually build it in a way integrating with blockchain so that even if we wanted to restrict you from accessing your own data, we do not have the ability to do that. And that is a fundamental technical unlock that I think blockchains buy us.
We're taking little steps towards that, not being locked. And I love that. And so then there's the personal data. Yes. So then finally there's this notion every year, there's like 5, I don't know, 7 new papers, startups, people telling us that we should be asking for money for our data, putting a price tag on our personal data, licensing our data when it's understood it's intellectual property because there's many instances of it. And every year people would then sort of come to realize that it's not so simple. We do not have a simple pocket or wallet where data is immutable. It's always the same and it defines us forever. And these traits we just carry from one place to the other. It's in such state of flow that I really like the idea that some elements will be, in fact, part of what we want to retain and then share across the network or even bind with our identity. And some others will simply be floating elsewhere, very flexible. So they're a very bad candidate for the blockchain, for something immutable. So how do you do that? How do you draw the line between identity and personal data?
Well, that's probably a question above my pay grade, because I think answering that globally is a huge conversation that is going to take place over decades across many countries and many companies and many other organizations. So, my non-facetious answer is that in the context of what we are building, which is a modern and composable professional networking platform, we believe that you can have the benefits of blockchain without having to post the underlying personal data to it. And, this is, I think we're just starting to get to the point where people are realizing this is how you use blockchain without going to the other extreme and posting all this data in blockchain, which is, the most extreme version of publicly announcing something on the internet. Because not only are you publicly announcing it, but you're also doing it immutably forever, with no ability to delete it, right? And I'm sure we don't have to talk about the problems under many different regulatory regimes with the lack of right of erasure. But what I think we are starting to do that helps solve this, and other people are coming to similar conclusions, is that you sort of use the tracking number model for data. So when you send a letter or a package, you get a tracking number for that package. And that allows you to basically track where that is without revealing the contents of that letter or package. And so what you can do is, if you treat every single piece of data as a package, you could basically create a tracking number for that package, and then you can basically post the existence that that package exists somewhere as of a certain point in time. And that way, the sender or the receiver can refer to that registry of tracking numbers and say, yes, in fact, this package was sent at this moment in time, because blockchains give you time in a unique way. And they don't have to post the underlying contents of that package for everybody on the internet to see. And in fact, they could delete their copies of the contents of that package and nobody would be the wiser. It would just be a meaningless ID that is floating in the internet, right? But the cool thing is, using cryptography, the sender or the receiver can then show to some other party, here is the actual package, and that party can instantly verify using math, yep, in fact, this package does have this tracking number, and I can refer to this tracking number, and so I know that this package is legitimate, and it was sent at this time. And that is sort of one of the ways that we're really excited to make data provable on blockchains without publicly posting the underlying data.
That's really good and really compatible with that liquid nature of data and how data that defines us and traits and so on. So now let's use an example, yes, of how things could be taken to the extreme and how that's incompatible with the framework. We had an interview with Joanna Mota here. She's a lawyer in Lisbon about a year ago, precisely on what you said, on how incompatible it is to put everything on the blockchain with the rights that the GDPR, for example, now grants. And then we've heard the WorldCoin, now World ID example. And so something that you seem to have resolved in a cleaner way is verifying that someone is human. That was the purpose that they declared after this big scandal. There was a big scandal in Spain, and now there's been this recent news in Bavaria, where even there, which is their base, from the legal point of view, that's the one-stop shop from a GDPR point of view. They seem to have now fallen out of favor. So, how have you solved for that? If I want to prove that I'm a human, instead of you scanning my iris, how is Icebreaker doing this?
Yeah. So I do want to come back to why it is important to be able to prove your humanness in a moment. But we, our main focus is being a modern professional network. And a lot of, when we think about how we hire and how we think about who we want to work with, it's sort of a Maslow's hierarchy of attestations, if you will, or statements about yourself. So at the very bottom, there is a question, are you human or not? Right? Then the next question is, okay, you may be human, but are you who you say you are? Right? And like, do you actually possess the control over the various handles that you claim to possess? Or are you posing as that person? Or do you actually have access to an email at that domain? Then moving up, are you good at what you do? And finally, the question, are you good to work with? And in thinking about that hierarchy, we thought, well, the most impactful kind of endorsement that somebody can get is simply, are you good to work with? And if you can get that from somebody that is trustworthy, then in many ways, the underlying layers don't even matter. Because, if you trust me and I endorse somebody for being good to work with, you can pretty much guarantee that they're not a robot, right? And that they're not lying about who they say they are on the internet, because I've just given you more information in my own endorsement of them. So that's what led us down the path of thinking, wow, web of trust is really, really powerful if you could manifest it in the right way. And when I say web of trust, it's this idea that instead of having centralized issuers saying, yes, Sergio is a human, or no, he is not a human, or we do not know, it doesn't really matter what the centralized authority says if you know me and you trust me and I say Sergio is a human. And that also
Yeah.
gives some really interesting properties for propagating data in different ways, because you essentially have the ability to crowdsource it based on trusted parts of the network. And so our approach, we kind of as a proof of concept just did, well, what's a fun attestation to let people give out? And we let people start attesting to humanness. And, because that's a pretty low risk attestation to give out to somebody when you meet them. And it ended up turning into a network of 1,000 nodes already, where basically it's all traceable through a lineage back to a root of trust, which comes directly from, in this case, me.
It's so good. It sounds so simple and it's so good. The fact that you and I have met in person, that's enough. Last time we spoke, I was worried you hadn't seen the body snatchers. Anyway, so for whoever has seen that, it's so basic and so good, right?
Yeah.
So we see each other, we've met in person. I can already attest to the fact that you're human. And we're building these systems, scanning people's irises, so that others, again, so that a system can keep that data, attest to it. And now there's all sorts of problems because the data cannot be erased because it's in the blockchain or whatever happens, whatever comes out of it, because I haven't read it.
Yeah, I think there are arguments for different models of proving whatever, and I think there can be multiple correct ways of doing it. So part of the power of these systems is that you can pick and choose as an application developer or as a business, which systems do I want to interoperate with and which I do not. And that is also a fundamental unlock as we move beyond these closed ecosystems, where today the only way to know if somebody has verified their employment history is to be LinkedIn, right? Because they actually don't make that
Yes.
interoperable outside if you wanted to do that programmatically. And with Icebreaker now, we're making that programmatically accessible too. So anybody can go verify their email and you can instantly see that if that person chooses to make it available on their profile. So I think there are many different models for proving humanness. I also don't love passive biometrics based approaches. I think there are ways that WorldCoin are changing their model to make it compatible with like the rights of erasure, and based on the tracking number idea that we talked about, I think there are ways that you can do that. But I think it's even more powerful when you use a model like web of trust, where anybody that has received an attestation traceable back to some single root of trust or some set of seed inputs, then it becomes very flexible. And the other benefit is that if at some point one of those nodes, which you can think about as like authorized to make more attestations about more humans, if at one point one of those nodes turns dishonest, you can simply disqualify all of the attestations that those nodes have made from that point in time forward, but still keep the existing network and basically allow that prior network to continue propagating. So from that perspective, it's much more able to self-heal based on introducing bad data. Whereas with centralized systems, you can't.
So now let's bring it down to earth and real world examples. So now we've got Icebreaker. I've got my profile. There's a Masters of Privacy profile. And I already see the benefits, right? So LinkedIn is Microsoft. They decide everything. The data it's got the worst of both worlds. The data is public because anybody can find it. So if we thought that our network connections were being kept somewhere safe, that's never going to be safe. It's never going to be secret. The fact that we belong to a company is in Crunchbase, it's in the public registries, it's all over the place. So the fact that we share it, the fact that it's protected under a login means nothing. You can search on Google and find every single LinkedIn profile and how they're connected. So that data is now public. And yet, it is closed because it is Microsoft, it's LinkedIn that decides what to do with it. So people are up in arms now in Europe after the fine from the DPC, from the Irish DPC to LinkedIn. And there's more things coming. So there's two basic problems here. One of them is advertising. There was no legal basis for advertising. And some people are asking for consent. There's the whole dilemma with legitimate interest. That's for another day. And then there's a dilemma with AI training. So there's lots of complaints these days about LinkedIn as they start closing the circle. And of course, they need to get some value out of it. I can see that recruiters are placing ads. There's premium subscriptions being sold. There's ads being sold on the feed. And the last thing I heard, which is going to get people even angrier, is that organic posts on the feed are about to be much harder to find. It's going to become another Facebook because it's so saturated.
It's the classic attract versus extract model, right? First you, then you extract.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. So now we're all in there. There's no way out. And yes, the data that is public, and yet it is closed. So Icebreaker gives me the hope that I can bring my professional identity, which means my connections, that those are set free from LinkedIn. That is beautiful in itself, for sure. And now I've got another thing. During that interview with Liz's founder, Adrian Dirk, that you referred to earlier, he used a concept called selective disclosure, which I really liked. And I think is missing in the LinkedIn world. LinkedIn has this, is part of this Silicon Valley sort of obsession with getting us to share as much as we can in a single place. I think Zuckerberg has the same kind of obsession, right? Share everything. This is you. Like everything about you should be here. And this is all you. And I do not agree with that because I don't want to bother people in a piano lesson with my legal background and vice versa. And I want to have a richer life by having, a sports identity, even family, because LinkedIn has been around now for so many years that you start seeing a second generation, joining the platform, and you can see their parents vouching for them, liking their posts. So now they even have access to that. It's like the entire graph about our social network. Everything has to be self-contained. I do not like that. So by having something that would allow me to have that kind of selective disclosure, I think it would have something that is really more real. How do you tackle all of that?
Well, first, they all do it for a reason. And that is based on their business model, which is ultimately selling advertising. And they can sell advertising at higher CPMs when they have more data. And that data is more valuable and more closed for them to sell. So this is a reason why these advertising-based ecosystems have a disincentive from allowing you to essentially curate different versions of yourself or only have portions of yourself visible. And when you think about it, it's also kind of, from a professional perspective, it's sort of an outdated model of way careers work, right? Like, granted, some of us are still, one job to another job to another job, but there are many people, especially, in the generation that's just graduating from universities now, where they may have multiple jobs at the same time. You could also have sort of different aspects of your life or different professional interests. And when you're forced to put it all in a linear timeline on your LinkedIn page, that I think reduces the dimensionality of our identity. And
Yeah.
we are
Yeah.
multidimensional. So I think that inhibits expression of who we are. So, we know there is an incentive for these platforms to do it. I think another really powerful thing with cryptography that you mentioned earlier around the term zero knowledge proofs is that they enable selective disclosure. So just for anybody who might be listening who's not familiar with the term zero knowledge proof or zero knowledge cryptography, it is one of the reasons why I left Coinbase to go found Icebreaker, because my background before Coinbase was in Google doing marketing, and I didn't think that this was possible. But basically, you can use math in order to take some underlying credential, like let's say it's your driver's license that is in a digitally verifiable piece of information, which is happening increasingly in EEA, as well as California recently announced their integration, and more DMVs are going to follow in the States and elsewhere. And what a zero knowledge proof allows you to do is it allows you to take an underlying piece of data like a driver's license and generate a proof like I am over 18 years old without disclosing any other information, and do it potentially in a way where it only exists in the context of a particular business or advertiser or organization. So from an advertising perspective, this gives us superpowers to be able to do things we couldn't before. And it also enables use cases like, being able to prove certain aspects of yourself around child-directed, or I don't know if you followed that Pornhub just withdrew from Florida because of their law to require age verification for under 18. And I think it's because of the concern, like nobody wants to put all their other identifying information in.
Same as in Europe. Same story.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is now
Yeah.
solvable with math, and we're getting to the point where we have applications that enable us to click a button and prove that. And a year ago, that wasn't possible. And 2 years ago, this was science fiction. So this is what I'm really, really excited about doing more of. And this is going to permit all kinds of other use cases, like being able to use the fact that you have been working at Google for 10 years and you're a director and you have a ton of professional credentials and you're looking for a job, but you don't want to basically post it on your public profile, but you do want to use some of the accumulated reputation that you have built up over many years in order to help you rise to the top when applying to a role, right? And that's something that LinkedIn isn't going to build anytime soon, because their incentive is to force you into a single box so that you put everything in one place so that they can send you in-mails that are basically being monetized at $10,000 CPMs, if you do the math, at least based on the US thing, which makes them the highest ROI ad spot on the entirety of the internet. And meanwhile, when I want to search for people that I know who are currently principal engineers, I need to pay $50 a month for the privilege of doing that. These are reasons why we need a new model, or at least choices. And one of the things that are also now possible because of some of these similar technologies around zero-knowledge cryptography is the ability to pull data out of closed platforms in a permissionless way. So we haven't talked about it yet. I'm not sure if you've done it, but in our product, behind an allow list, we actually have a flow where you can permissionlessly export your data right now,
Yep.
starting with LinkedIn. And what it allows you to do is it kind of uses the way the internet works using TLS, and it causes the website or the app to essentially sign the data that they're sending to the client, and then we can turn that into a cryptographically verifiable proof and pull that data in. And so you can actually import the entirety of your address book into Icebreaker right now. So I think that is a huge unlock that I'm very excited about, which is the ability to make it easier for people to bring the data that they want. And part of that data is who you know.
Yeah, and for example, in the EU, legitimate interest as a legal basis that LinkedIn was relying on does not unlock portability rights. They only are born out of consent or contract. So there's another limitation. Okay, so now you've got this, and LinkedIn is bundling the notion of identity, right, and connections with the fact that I can publish about something. For example, there's a piece of news like yesterday. There were new guidelines from the EDPB, so everyone is talking about that, and we are enriching each other's understanding of the law by commenting around it. Would we need then somehow some sort of decentralized Quora or Reddit that plugs into the identity you've built to be able to replicate that feed?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential when you start thinking about decoupling who you know from the content that you see and create. And all of our social networks today have coupled those two things. So on LinkedIn, you have to basically build your network, and then you're going to see what your network and your network's network is posting. And it sounds like in the future, also whoever is paying to reach you. But that's their core idea. And meanwhile, you go over to Twitter or X, and you see a whole different set of content based on the people that you follow there, which might have a high overlap, but you basically had to create that other network from scratch. And oftentimes it takes a lot of effort to go get that right. And meanwhile, if somebody else comes out with a new network like Blue Sky or Mastodon or whatever, you have to recreate everything else there. And it's a total pain, right? And most users just give up because people don't want to spend hours curating their network before they can actually get any value out of it. And so wouldn't it be powerful if you could just click a button, and when you show up to a new networking app, you can basically instantly see all of the people that you already know, and maybe they've already created lists based on the people that you know and where you know them from elsewhere, and you have an instantly curated feed. That is not only useful for new apps that are competing, but also if you could take that back to the existing platforms where people are posting content, you could actually get really interesting remixes of the content that's already on those platforms. So for example, you might have, a bunch of people on Twitter that you follow that you're not connected with on LinkedIn, and having the ability to kind of remix content and see like all of the people that I trust for privacy, regardless of where I know them from, right? And this is what they're posting about on LinkedIn. Or think about it, content platform agnostic. Like I just care about people and I want to know what they're talking about. And I don't even care where they're talking about it, right? Like if they post it on LinkedIn, great. If they post it on Twitter, doesn't matter. If you're really smart in a subject and I follow you, I just want to see that aggregated feed. And so that's another thing that you can start doing is when you decouple people from content, you can start remixing content, and the platform itself doesn't matter to the same extent it did, because really the key unlock is
Yeah,
the people.
that's amazing. And there's also that element, again, of selective disclosure. Like, for example, I go into the FT on the Financial Times, and the comments are amazing. Sometimes there's great people. I don't need to know who they are. I do not need to have them tied to the little LinkedIn profile. So this is ideal. So that means we need an ecosystem, and this is a key building block. We've got Icebreaker now, and then around it we can build other pieces, which leads me to this other question, something that I was really surprised with. I tell you, I've already told you, but I love the app. I love how it flows. I really think it's well made. And something that is very simple is the wallet, how you created that wallet. Can I then take that elsewhere?
Yes. Um, so yeah, I think one of the challenges with crypto is it is a classically hard or outside in technology. And so many of the early implementations of it not only were they early, but also just trying to use it was really, really hard from a UX perspective. So you had to be, a giant nerd and also kind of like a PhD with all of these different tools that you need to use, and also think about how do I actually secure all this stuff. But at its core, what crypto enables is digital ownership. And, digital ownership can be of money, which was sort of its first use case, but also data and identity. And we want to make sure that you do own your identity, but we don't want to, smack you over the head with it when you're just trying to get started, because nobody is signing up for a professional networking platform thinking, I want to own my data, right? That's always something that it's important to be able to do, but even the knowledge and the assurance that you can own your data or you can export your data whenever you want is often the value prop versus making you go through the steps to export it and completely control it to begin with, right? And so we came to the conclusion the lowest common denominator of identity on the internet is an email address. And so then we decided, okay, we need to build the product around that and actually remove complexity. And we're going to continue to remove complexity so that you just show up with an email address, you sign up, and then as you want to enrich your profile, you can. And if you want to take your data elsewhere, you can do that easily. And we actually have a sign-in with Icebreaker flow already where you could show up to any other place on the internet and immediately sign in with Icebreaker and have the data that you have put on your Icebreaker profile shared with whatever app that is.
I think it was 2017, we built the first prototype for something that we were calling the Customer Data Hub. It was a bit of a dream. We thought instead of every company, like everyone has thought of this thing, but every company have a Salesforce account and another instance of Dan Stone, every single copy. And all they get from you is an email address and phone number, and then the states at which you are in their funnel. So with every single company, you go and buy offline now, shopping season, everyone is collecting your first party data at checkout, and everything is ending in another instance of Salesforce. It's so inefficient and it sounds so silly. So if at this point there's one single instance, I know that that cannot be applied to every single property as we once streamed, but to your email address, to your phone number, and then that is centralized so that instead of you exercising your rights, your data access rights, and the whole idea of data subject access rights synced across APIs, this is a huge pain for privacy, management platforms, for DPOs. We've tackled that in the program here. I don't know, in another interview. It would be so simple if it simply points towards your identity, which you control, and then they can add on top of that in their own structured databases. Have you thought of that? It's something that Microsoft could do now because, again, LinkedIn, because they own Dynamics. And I always thought that was an amazing play if competition authorities would let them. But this is a much better play where individuals are in control of their identity, and then whenever you are dealing with a company, before they start throwing their agents at us, this agent force and whatever comes next, at least it's already something that we control. Have you thought of that?
A lot, yeah. And I think this is where there's a thin line between utopian and dystopian outcomes. Uh, and for some people, that line may be in different places. But I think one reason why someone like Microsoft has not built some sort of tool to allow users to basically share what data they want is that they can make more money with their own products to the extent that that data only exists in that product. And so when you look at the history of all of the protocols and all of the apps that have tried to work with the data providers to extract that data or to make that data available, usually it fails because wherever that data lives, that data owner, not talking about the individual, but the the other controller of that data, the company, they don't have an incentive to make it easy for users to export that data. Like we had to require them from a regulatory perspective to let that data be unlocked. And even now, those companies are still generally, dragging their feet to do that. So our thesis is the only way that you can make the data actually interoperable is by giving people a means and a motive to do it themselves. And just, doing it for the sake of owning your data is not a good enough incentive, maybe aside from people who listen to this podcast. This is why we decided we would start with professional networking, because finding a job or filling a job is one of those burning enough needs that people will deal with products that are still in development and that will change their behaviors versus the incumbents if you can get them better results. So I think the key unlock is having a user-owned identity protocol or layer. And then the other unlock is having the AI agent infrastructure to be able to easily use that, right? Because nobody wants to go and manage all of their data settings with the 137,000 different companies and organizations they have relationships with. It doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't do it. But again, for similar reasons, the big companies don't really have a lot of incentive to enable us to, hey, let us go clean up your privacy settings and stop sharing all your data with all of our customers, right? But if you have a user-owned system, then you need a means of sharing the data as well as owning it and provisioning it, which is part of what we're building. And then you need the actual agents to be able to go do that. And I think we're very, very close to seeing that come to life. Like these are ideas that date back to the 2010s with Doc Searls and Cluetrain Manifesto, right? The idea of inverting CRMs. And I think it was the right idea. We just didn't.
Yeah, the VRM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're going to get
Yeah.
there. And that is what I'm super excited for over the next decade.
It's super exciting. It's super exciting. Thank you, Dan. The last thing I'll say is, of course, we should all try Icebreaker. And it also Icebreaker came up during our interview with Jamie Smith, talking about AI agents. So I think it connects very nicely with that new reality. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia.
Okay, that's all for today. Follow us on Blue Sky and in the Masters of Privacy Altogether profile, you will find the starter pack, which includes the feeds of all of our past guests. Also, if you're ready to escape the LinkedIn trap, and by extension, the Microsoft trap, we have an Icebreaker Masters of Privacy account. Feel free to send us a connection request on that platform if you're ready for it. Our main website is mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.